Good morning. You're very welcome. Thanks for joining us here for this masterclass on pitching to journalists, an insider's guide. It's great to have you here. Lots of you have registered, which is very exciting. So I really hope we can help you out with some top tips throughout the session and get some questions from you as well and help with that. So I'm Victoria Smith. Nice to see you again. I've met some of you before, I'm sure. I am a journalist and media trainer here at Media First. And I'm joined this morning by Brendan McGowan, who is an actual real live news editor, very well respected in the industry. Welcome, Brendan. Great to have you here. In fact, there's so much information about you. I'm going to have to read some of it out just so everyone knows who you are and that you're for real. So you've worked in regional television news for about 25 years. Yes. You've been editor of all the key input departments as forward planning editor and news editor. Obviously, your speciality is London. You were the editor of ITV News and in charge of the network's coverage of the general election campaign. And in terms of London, you spearheaded ITV London's planning coverage of the 2012 Olympic Games. I could go on, but I think we now realise that you are the real deal. So you're very welcome.
Thank you.
This morning. And I know we're going to have lots of questions for you and lots of things to talk about. But before we do that, let's just go through a little bit of housekeeping, just so that we're all on the same level here. So there are lots of ways of getting in touch with us and taking part in this masterclass, and we hope that you will. Obviously, you can get in touch via Zoom chat. And we also have the wonderful Mentimeter. This is a chance for you to get interactive with us. You can see now on the screen there's a QR code which you can access to get into Menti, to get Menti up on your phones, so you can take part in a couple of little quizzes, little questions we've got for you. This information that you can see on the screen now will also come up again when we actually run Menti. Any problems with that, just stick a little note on the Zoom chat and we can help you out. So let's make a start. Let's go to Mentimeter straight away and let's take a little look. Let's get some feeling from you out there as to how you get on when it comes to pitching your ideas, your spokespeople to the media, to journalists like Brendan and like me. Have you ever had a pitch rejected or possibly worse still, ignored? Let's find out. Oh, the votes are coming in thick and fast,
They
Brendan.
really
Look at that. So we're getting lots of yeses. We've got
Lots
36, lots of rejections or being ignored. Yes, it's all your fault. No, so I hope that everybody out there hasn't taken this too personally or too much to heart.
No.
We've had a few people who've never had their pitch rejected or ignored. I think 3 people so far, as opposed to 42 who have. So I hope that those 2 or 3 people that we hear from throughout this session to find out perhaps their tips and their tricks and their techniques. But thank you for being honest with us this morning about getting those things rejected or ignored. Let's take a look then at how perhaps we can help you with that. And I think we should start by saying, you know, we as journalists are conduits to the real people who count, the audience. So it's super important, isn't it, to know as a comms professional who your audience is, but also to know a bit about the journalists and the newsroom and what that looks like. So let's just start by painting a picture from your point of view of the newsroom, so we get some idea of when we should make those first approaches to people like you, Brendan.
Sure. It's a meeting culture. Essentially the input desk, which is the news desk, and the planning desk are answerable to the editor. Editor has the final choice really on what gets through the gate and what doesn't get through the gate. But before that, we on news desks and planning desks are fishing for stories. We have a blank sheet of paper and we need to get at least 8 stories for the next day, stories that we know will have a couple of key elements. And those elements are regionality, in our case in London, human interest, and eye-catching appeal, whether it's a first or it's a new thing, it's something that we haven't seen before. The meetings are at 9 o'clock when we go through the day, what's been planned the day before. And then at 12 o'clock, we all gather around and we say, what's going to be on tomorrow's programme? And that's where, during the morning, the planners will have been going through their emails, going through local newspaper websites, going through PA, going through all the sources that they use to get together a list for the next day. And then by 5 p.m, just before everybody goes home, before the programme's on air, a little bit more of a catch-up to nail down what stories we've commissioned for that next day.
And that brings me nicely onto a question that we've had in from Graham, who asks, what is your ideal suggested day of the week for pitching? But I suppose in your case it would be, what is the best time of the day?
Well, both actually,
Right.
and it's a really good question. One thing I didn't mention is that we also have a weekly meeting where we look ahead to the next week. So that's usually on a Wednesday. So my advice would be, let the planners get through the first few days of the week. They're quite grueling. You have all the nervous energy of getting a list for the next 7 days together. Thursday, Friday, they're good days to start getting the attention of the forward planners who are under enormous pressure before that, and also I would add probably the afternoon.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. Good to know from
Yeah.
your point of view when those pitches should come in. Nyla's asking, how long should a typical pitch be, and what should it look like? Should it be an email or a phone call or maybe a press release?
Keep it brief. Planners are looking at hundreds of emails every day. They're also looking at, as I mentioned, other sources. So you have to catch their eye very quickly. So keep it one page, decent headline. That headline doesn't have to be fancy. It has to say, this is what this story is. This is why this story should be interesting for you. It's based in London, for example, or the home counties, and put a picture if you can. Give us some idea of what we're going to see when we come and film at your organisation.
There's another question come in on Zoom about that. Just looking for it now. So, okay, this is from Matt. This might be personal preference, but having heard from various different journalists, how would you like to receive a typical press release? Some journalists have said including it all as text in an email can look spammy. But then again, as you say, you're perusing and browsing. So what should that really look like in terms of the length? And I mean, how much time will you spend looking at a press release, Brendan?
In truth, not very much time at all. It's a good question, because the text, if it's set out very clearly, here's the story, that's what we're offering, there's more information in an attachment, that will work if what you've set out in the initial email is clear and grabby. That's the truth. Yeah. We're scanning, as I said. We're not perusing at length. We're getting, these are coming across our desk, and we're reading them and then moving on to the next one if it hasn't grabbed.
A good question from Catherine. It would be great to know how to change your pitching style depending on the type of broadcast, e.g. pitching the same story to TV, radio and print. You must have seen perhaps emails or press releases that come in and you think, this isn't really a TV story, or this would make a great TV story. So what would your advice be to somebody who's perhaps looking to not necessarily send a round robin, but appeal to different types of sections of the media?
Again, I think both print and broadcast, they're after those impactful human interest stories which have a broad appeal. If it's a cost of living story, have a good case study to exemplify what you're talking about. Use picture in both cases. Add some image which catches the eye. And keep it simple, and also, I suppose, send it to the right person.
Yes, absolutely. Find out who the right person is. And so don't be afraid to make a call, but also I think it's important to say that we shouldn't take rejection personally. You would encourage people to try again?
I would, and even on occasion, if you think, actually, I think you're missing it, I think this is a genuinely good story, don't be afraid to phone. Try phoning the news desk. Can I be put through to the planning desk? Who's on the planning desk today? So get a name. Then you're going to be put through to, for example, at ITV London, Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. I've sent this email through. I just wanted to follow up. We think this is a great story because we think you've missed something here. This is what we think it is. I think that's always worth a go.
Okay, so perhaps an email or a press release with a follow-up phone call.
That's what I think, yeah. That usually works.
I know you've got a good example of something that worked for you very recently, which had an interesting visual that caught your eye.
Yes.
And also a useful email that also ticked a few boxes for you. Talk us through this story about the Tottenham Court Road interactive screen.
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted to talk about this because it does hit a few things. First of all, it was from a guy called Nick at the outside organisation. He was. We were looking that day for something for part 2, as we call it, of the programme, something a bit softer, a bit lighter.
I think we've got a slide of this, so hopefully we can put that up.
So
here's the email.
There's Nick's email, and what I thought he did quite well, even though it's a very simple email, is a big London story. I thought, oh well, I don't want to miss this. I better pay attention. And then he says there's a press release attached. But what Nick did in this email is that he attached. He also sort of told me that we would be the first to cover it. Now, if you're the first, if someone's telling me you're the first to cover it, you think, I don't want to lose out to someone else. So I'm going to just check what he's got here. And I think what he did is he attached a really good photograph to it, which gave us a great idea of what we'd be able to see when we got down to Tottenham Court Road. So I just simply called Nick, and he made the point, look, this is all part of a wider development of Crossrail, which is now open, the Elizabeth line. So that gave us something of a news angle to it as well. And as soon as he'd mentioned that, with that visual, and we'll be first, I thought this is great. And so we not only did we go to the Outernet on that occasion, we've since been back to because we now have a bit of a relationship when we're doing stories about, for example, footfall in central London. We know we get a warm welcome there, we know the visuals are good, and we know that they'll make time to put spokespeople up.
So you now have a relationship with Nick, with this contact.
That's right.
Because he sent you a story that was relevant to London, had a beautiful visual attached to it, which gave you a sense of the scale of the thing. Because some pictures are better than others, and also promising that you would be first, which is going to flatter any media organisation's ego.
That's right, and that word first, it does tend to catch the eye, because if you think, I can sell this to my editor, rather than here's an attraction, it's like, this is the first of its kind. First work.
Clever, isn't it? It doesn't take much in a way. No. Another question that's actually come up from, it's an anonymous attendee, how exciting. So how do you actually find good contacts these days? Gorkana seems so out of date. What do we think about that?
Well, if the question is, how do people find the contacts inside, or is the question how we find the contacts?
I think, we assume that how they find the contacts on the news desk.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Don't be afraid to phone the news desk. Phone, and we'll put you through to the people on the planning desk.
And is it easy to find the number for the news desk?
It's very easy. It's on Google. Just Google it, and it is there, as they all are. But that is my advice. Don't be scared about phoning us. We will sometimes be impatient and busy, but we are in the market for your stories. We have to fill a programme. And yes, the top half of a programme sometimes gets filled with stories which are press releases from City Hall. They might be about political stories, or they might be from TfL or other sort of official sources. But not all of them, and it's those second half stories, particularly the top of part 2 stories as they're known, which is more social affairs, where we have to turn a corner from the dark into the light, from the shade into the light, to take the viewer to the end of the programme. So call. You will get at least someone answering the call, and usually they'll put you through to the right person.
Lovely. Nice question from Jessica England. How far in advance do your planning team want to hear about broadcast opportunities? Remind us about that one.
That is, again, Jessica, that is a good question. If you get in touch with us 2 weeks before, we'll put it to one side and we'll forget all about it. That's the truth.
That's good to know.
5 days is I would say the optimum time. That gives you enough time to think, right, well, I'm looking at, let's say, Monday, it's Friday, I'll slot that in then mentally for Wednesday or Thursday. I'll think about it Tuesday, Jessica, and I'll call you then. Yeah.
And would it be worth Jessica getting back to you in the interim, just to make sure that it hasn't been put to one side? What would you say about that?
Follow-up email, I think, in something like that. Okay. Just a reminder.
All right. This has just come in from Bertil. Is it worthwhile investing time in crafting and publishing press releases, or would it be more effective to allocate resources to tailor pitches for target media? So it's about the press release, isn't it, and how that should look?
I think a press release, a crafted press release, I mean, I think a press release should almost be like a wedding invitation. It should be this is what we're doing, this is when we're doing it. Here's a photograph of the bride and groom or whatever. Just very simple. I don't think that necessarily needs a lot of crafting.
Yeah.
It's just well, in our journalism training, it was always the 5 W's, wasn't it?
Yes.
And that's what you need: who, what, why, where, when.
Yes.
That's how we think as journalists, and that's really simply put how a press release should look.
Yeah, that's really invaluable advice,
Yeah.
those 5 W's.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know you can find those 5 W's on our website, on our Media First website. They are there for you to look at and enjoy. Let's talk a bit more about visuals. We had a question from Lisa earlier saying, what are you looking for in terms of visual? E.g., what is good practice for sending photos or videos? And I think it's important to reflect, as well as sending those in, I think it's important to make that brilliant point that you were talking to me about earlier, about how you trawl other visual sources, such as local newspapers or other news organisations. And I know that you have an example of that. So tell us about this story about the stairwell.
Yeah, so this was a local newspaper story which had attached and embedded some video into it. And on the face of it, it was okay. I think it came from an estate agent initially in a press release to a newspaper, local paper, about a £20,000, I think it was, a stairwell which was being sold, which is quite, for us, oh, okay, that's interesting. But when you saw the video, it helped us to understand the story. You see this rather grim-looking space, and it's a very simple device. This, you walk down the stairs with an iPhone and look back, and that helped us to understand when we went there what we would be seeing, and gave us, the reporter, an idea of how to start structuring the piece, how to start scripting the piece, but also it drew us in. Look at this. I mean, who's going to pay money for that? So
really?
that got through, and we were down there, you know, I think the next day covering the story. Yeah.
I mean, that's just someone's video on an iPhone. Did you actually use this video?
We did.
That's interesting.
We did.
And did you use your own crew as well?
Yeah, so we sent a crew there. This actually brings me to a sort of slightly a different point, which is when the reporter got there, of course the estate agent was very happy to be interviewed, as were the people who were living there. They were gobsmacked that it was being sold. What we didn't have was a kind of a wider property expert to to make a point about the market in London and why spaces like this were being offered for that kind of price. And we struggled. In the end, the reporter actually contacted a relative who was also, I think, a surveyor of some kind. But it brought up for me sometimes the fact that we don't have a great property contact, for example, who at the drop of a hat would say, sure, I'll go down to, I think that was in Staines actually, we'll go down to Egham or wherever it is, and we'll do an interview with you. And those sort of things emerge once you've established a regular relationship with somebody, for example, in the property world.
And that literally just came from a local paper with someone's video on an iPhone, which you not only used, but developed into a wider story with your own professional camera crew, and then you were looking for spokespeople to comment on the story. So lots of opportunities there, actually, that came from that one video.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, are there any terrible visuals or any kind of things that really you just look at, or someone's tried to capture your interest visually but it just hasn't really worked? What kind of things do you get? Anything
which is plain, anything which has no sort of colour or depth, or I think we all know, even buying a decent birthday card for somebody, you know what's interesting, what's funny, what's unusual, but something which is just kind of has no movement in it, which is if it's video, make sure that it's got some movement in it. It's what most of us would consider to be something interesting to look at. It's as basic as that, I think.
Now here's a really interesting question from Sam Dowling. I'm interested to get your answer on this, Brendan. So for specialisms such as health or science stories, the human interest, says Sam, can be second-hand and pictures are scant. So can he have some advice on pitching policy? Is it best done through a specialist producer, good luck with that, rather than FP?
The short answer is yes. Specialist producers are probably your best route for things which are lacking in great picture. It still has to have meaningful news value, of course, and ideally something which has a broad appeal, something that most people can relate to, that affects their lives. But yes, in terms of experts, I find that you finds that you hear them on the radio more.
Right.
I think that's a natural place for experts in. There's a good example today, I think, in the news from UCL. So they've put out a report that cold water swimming is beneficial for women reaching menopause. So I saw the press release, but that's all it was. It was an academic release. No picture to go with it.
Yeah.
So what you'll find is that will end up at best as being an interview in a studio with that academic, perhaps,
right,
with some illustrated picture that we'll find from the library. But yes, good question.
Although there are plenty of cold water swimming clubs around.
Very true.
It's all the rage. Another interesting question. So if you attached a brief press release, would you always expect a journalist to get in touch with you to discuss rather than use what you've put in the press release? You're not going to have time, are you, to have a to and fro like that?
No. I mean, as I said, the tsunami of data coming across our desks, the number of stories which are vying for our attention, it's really, as I said earlier, we skim and move on, and delving deep into a release that hasn't caught your eye in the first place, I just don't really know. That's not my lived experience.
Yeah.
Really.
And we saw that email from Nick with the visual and the press release, which was punchy, short, and ticked your boxes.
Yes.
In terms of being first, being accessible, being local, and looking great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a nice one from Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. Anonymous. We'd love to know what you think of awareness days. Are they outdated? How we can get them on the news?
Awareness days whereby journalists... okay, so charity awareness days is that what we're talking about?
I'm guessing, yes.
I mean, awareness days do sort of feel a bit outmoded, if I'm honest. Sometimes organisations like ITV News will decide to get behind a fitness sort of campaign, their own generated, an anti-obesity campaign. But those awareness campaigns that are generated outside those parameters, they're unusual. There are a few exceptions. We've invested a lot where I work in. It's not really an awareness campaign, but it's a charity. It's called the ACLT, which reaches out to the black community to encourage them to have themselves tested as potential bone marrow donors.
Right.
That works because they had a great starting point for their story.
Yes.
Their son was in desperate need, but also it helped us get into a part of the community that we wouldn't normally get into.
Interesting. Yeah. So if those awareness days perhaps have that human interest element or something else that's going to attract us as journalists in terms of a story, they could work. So it's how to sell them in.
Yes, and we follow the story, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to get this question in from Catherine. She rightly points out that we are seeing a huge drop in the number of journalists locally. We've gone from a traditional news floor to perhaps a handful of people working across a wider section of the industry, and many, of course, working from home now. So what's the number one best way, would you say, to attract attention with fewer people available to pick up your story?
Social media, I suppose. Get yourself noticed. It does happen, we'll pick up on something that's gone viral.
Right.
That in itself becomes part of the story. It's sell yourself, know to whom you're selling.
Yes.
Know what we want.
Yeah.
Understand that there's a need for us to fill our programs, but we're choosy.
Yes.
And I've mentioned some of the key points that we're looking for. Picture, always picture.
Well, let's look as well. Let's think about all the radio opportunities and the print opportunities out there. Let's look at what all journalists, no matter which of those disciplines we come from, want in terms of a story. Now, I know some of you will have seen this before. It's a matrix, an acronym, if you like, that we call TRUTH. These are the boxes that we would love you to tick when approaching us in terms of pitching, because they work not just for us. We're not really very important. We're just the conduits, aren't we, Brendan,
Right.
to the people who really count,
Exactly.
the people that you really want to reach out to, the audience, whether that be a print readership, a radio audience, or a TV audience. So let's look at truth, remind ourselves of what this means. And of course, the T is for topical. We want the stories to be timely or trending,
Yep.
as you mentioned, all about what's interesting now. And this could be more of an evergreen story, climate change or
Yes.
the cost of living, but we look for a topical angle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what you can provide as comms professionals with your spokespeople. It's got to be relevant. So in your instance, Brendan, it would be relevant to a London
Yeah, and relatable,
audience.
I guess, yes.
And relatable in terms of perhaps the language, the imagery, the interviewees and the spokespeople that you use. So if it's relevant to your audience, it'll be relevant to us, the journalists, in terms of a pitch. I really like the unusual, which is something that you can have a lot of fun with. We love unusual because our audience does too, and that can be an unusual story, an unusual anecdote, unusual facts, figures, the first, the biggest, the last, the cheapest, the most expensive, the longest, and all those analogies, you know, the size of Wembley Stadium, the height of the Empire State Building. We like all that unusual. So if you can bring that to us from your organisation, we will, our ears will perk up. And a little bit of trouble and tension. I mean, this is something that will come from us as journalists. If there's a bit of adversity in a story that perhaps has been overcome, you know, I think that works really well in terms of a story.
Yes.
And it might be that you want to comment, or your spokespeople want to comment on something that is troublesome.
Oh, it's got some tension.
It's got some tension, because we've tried selling good news and nobody really buys it, do they?
Don't, I'm afraid.
We don't want happy stories about sunny days, sadly, although wouldn't mind a couple at the moment.
No.
But we do like a bit of tension,
We do.
a bit of trouble to get the audience hooked in, reeled in.
Yeah.
And then key, the most important thing, this should probably be at the top of the acronym, but then it would say HATRIT, which wouldn't really work. But human interest, people. Stories are about people.
Yeah.
And that means ideally a case study. You probably all know that every time you pitch to us as journalists, we say, have you got a case study that we could speak to or interview or film? And that's the best way of telling a human story. But your spokesperson might also have a story of their own that they can talk about, that they can own, that they can tell better than anyone else. But something that's going to tick that human box, that's going to relate to the audience in terms of a human story. So that is truth. Hopefully that still is the truth from where you're sitting.
It looks pretty good to me.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
And I know that a recent story that you covered, I think, ticked all of those truth elements. So tell us about the Charlie Mullins story.
Well, this it goes back a while, and I chose it because I think it does illustrate all of those things, really. First of all, it was a very clever bit of PR by Charlie Mullins at Pimlico Plumbers. It was, we've got the country's oldest worker, Buster Martin, there he is. And it really was a story about somebody who, first of all, you don't really kind of hear this every day, somebody who's that age and still working. And I'm told he was. We went down and we interviewed him, as did everybody else, at Pimlico Plumbers in his livery, cleaning Pimlico Plumbers vehicles. He was a great character. He was authentic. It sort of, at the time, there was a lot of talk about apprenticeships, and here was a guy who'd been through all of that and was still working. And it was really something which, as you say, it ticked almost all the boxes for us. And they were very clever in that this wasn't Buster's last appearance. They then went on to do the next first, which was he's the oldest person to run the London Marathon. So they kept that ball rolling, I thought, very, very cleverly, and we lapped it up.
Yeah, and that's how to make relationships, isn't it? By continuing to give you the information that you know will work 100%. In terms of your agenda.
We know the viewers really took to that story. They
because of course you know your viewers really, really well.
We do. We know what they want, and we know essentially more or less what they hate.
Right.
So we kind of, well, we work accordingly and we commission accordingly.
Yeah, and then you have trusted contacts within the comms world that you can go back to and they can come back to you.
100%,
Which brings me on to a question from Stuart. How is it best to find the most appropriate person or email address to send a pitch to? Stuart, sadly, has tried using journalistic contacts in the past and had no joy. So I know there are sort of ways of contacting journalists and picking up on story requests. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, I think somebody mentioned Gorkana earlier, and I think Gorkana does, unfortunately, get out of date quite quickly. And that can be very frustrating if you've spent a few hours contacting a load of journalists who will never receive your emails. Right. I can see that that's frustrating. I think just as we need to know our audience, I think anybody pitching to us needs to know their kind of target audience as well, if you like. And it really, honestly, isn't that difficult. It's probably on the ITV London website. It's probably on the BBC website. Look up who's on, as I said before, who's on the planning desk, who's on the news desk. And really, it's either, once you know their name, it's at itn.co.uk or at bbc.co.uk or at igv.com. Or, as I did mention earlier, just simply phone. Who's your planning editor? Can I ask who's planning tomorrow? And this is a moment perhaps to talk about the division between planning. You have a planning editor who's overseeing and sort of marshalling all the stories. There's then two planners below that person. One of them is looking after the next day. These are stories which we've committed to, and so we're contacting the people who've contacted us to set up the individual bits of it, and then someone's looking after the next week. So there are very few people on these desks. They don't change very often. The people on planning desks are long-lived. They usually stay within the organisations for quite some time. And once you know who they are, you know, that's that really. And
we're getting some questions about print media, but these tips are very relevant to all forms of media. We're journalists who've covered all forms ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it would still be, what you're saying would still be valid, would still be relevant. Laura's been asking about sharing tips for print media as well.
Yeah.
These tips go across the board. Look, I really like this question from Matt that's come in. Brendan, what is your pet hate? Is there something us comms professionals think is mustard but is just plain annoying?
Oh, that's a head scratcher, Matt. Thanks for that.
I mean, obviously, you know, judo bench.
Yes.
Judy Dent.
I mean, I think the one thing is if you do call, or don't be too gangbusters about it. I think sometimes telling us that this is the best thing that's ever happened to the automotive industry, or, you know, you'd be a fool to miss out on that. It's like that over salesy kind of approach.
Right.
It's a massive turn off, and
is
it's sort of like, we'll decide. That's how we think, at least, and that does sound arrogant, but we'll decide what we need. It's not for you to tell us how brilliant this is from the get-go. The best approach, I think, is to say, what do you think of this? We think it's great. Another thing I think is also worth saying to people like me is, before we go to the BBC or before we go to the Times, if it's print, we just thought we'd give you a chance to just have a think about this one, because that immediately makes you think, oh, I better look at this.
Interesting.
I don't want to see this on the opposition tomorrow.
Well, there's a question just there, look, from Mr. or Ms. Anonymous. Does it matter to you if a story is an exclusive or is being pitched to other news outlets as well?
Exclusive is a big word. If someone offers you something exclusively, it definitely is something that catches the eye. How exclusive something can be in this day and age is something I question, because you might see it on in a local newspaper and think, well, that's not exclusive if you're offering it to us. But generally, to anonymous attendees' question, it doesn't matter, but it is an additional. It's not a bonus exactly, but it's something that you'd pay attention to. Yeah.
Some questions coming in about social media as well, but we'll look at that in a minute. I wanted to go back to Menti, and I wanted to find out, love it if you could take part in this, to find out if or how a story has worked for you in the past, a story pitch. Let us know when a story pitch has worked for you. How did you get the journalists' interest? And I'm really hoping that at least 3 people out there will be able to tell us when a pitch has worked or how they got the journalists' interest. And while those responses are coming in, let's talk a little bit about social media and how people can get in touch with you via social media and how they can use social media when it comes to making those pitches.
This is pretty basic advice, I think, and it's probably not by no means exhaustive. But I know that when we're looking for stories, when we're looking for case studies to illustrate stories, there's one place on definitely that we go to all the time. And it's on Facebook, oddly enough. And there's something called, I think it's called the Entrepreneurs Hangout.
Yes.
And if you go onto that just in the course of your day or just check in every hour or every day, you'll see desperate planning editors from Sky, BBC, newspapers, ITV London for sure. We're doing a story next week on childcare. We are really keen to speak to people who run nurseries, and that will often happen. So they'll be looking because it's an entrepreneurs hangout. They'll be looking for people who are in that position, or simply do you know a mum who has twins who might be willing to speak to us? It's a constant flow of stuff on the Entrepreneurs Hangout. I think the hashtag journo request is definitely worth keeping an eye on, because we do go fishing on Twitter for that. And the other thing, and I just say it was basic, is once you know the names of the planning editors, it's very straightforward to find out who they are on Twitter, and you'll often see them on Twitter making appeals. And that's really that would be my simplest and plainest advice, really.
I think you'll find a whole raft of new followers when you get home tonight. Listen, some of this, we're getting some great responses coming in on story pitches working. So the first answer was it's worked for this person when they have a long-standing relationship with the reporter and they trust their judgment on the story. This is interesting. This one worked for one of our delegates. A press release about scientific research into a physical symptom of long COVID, which had a picture of the symptom. Interesting. I'm intrigued, actually. I'd love to know that.
Interesting to know where that story was placed.
Absolutely.
Probably in the newspaper, I would think.
Supplying everything. Someone's been very busy. Images, video interview, graphics, reconstruction videos. Offer a whole package for them to choose from or recreate. That's obviously worked in the past. Lots of different medium to attract all media types. Cute animal pictures always work well for us. Or people stories such as longevity of service.
100%.
Absolutely. Providing the full package, exclusivity, timeliness and trouble. GP practices were getting death threats on the back of the COVID vaccine programme. We gathered evidence of threat letters, etc., and pitched to ITV London.
I hope that got on, because that's a great story.
Well, I'm sure if you were in charge of the news desk that day that it would have done. This one, offering interviews to people such as case studies, business owners we helped. This was for radio. So important to get those people's stories on radio as well, because of course you've only got your voice. You haven't got the images. So if you can paint a picture in words, you're onto a winner.
100%.
And that's
really,
and you have
really,
really
advice,
important. Some polling stats linked with the cost of living, with someone with lived experience sharing how they were impacted. Altogether, that obviously made a package that worked. This is an interesting one. This was a theatre show about the Welsh rugby legend Ray Gravel, not sure how to pronounce his name, my apologies. It played to the Welsh rugby team at the Principality at the time in 2019 and became the inspiration behind Wales's 2019 Grand Slam.
That's impressive.
Yeah, very impressive. Very specific. I love that. And also meeting the planning team at an event and pitching to them in person, interesting, then following up later on email.
Great.
Someone's,
yes, the personal
been brave
touch.
And the personal touch. Because we know that those days of media lunches and being invited to sort of forward planning events and perhaps going for drinks, that's really gone now. Nobody has the time to do that.
I suppose the specialist correspondents might have, but even then, those guys are increasingly tasked and burdened with additional requests from desks to supply, you know, a piece for ITVX or a piece for our website. So yeah, I'm sorry, they are pretty much gone.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Let's talk about, we're getting some questions in about celebrities, and it brings me on to influencers. And should people use influencers to try and attract your attention? Does that work for you or not really?
Not really. I think for influencers, I think the sort of reaction for a journalist is that feels like undue influence.
Right.
If you sort of think, am I being a bit hoodwinked here? What is that person's? Why should I trust why should I trust just because this person has been on Love Island? Should I really believe what they're saying? I think there's a natural hesitancy for us when it comes to that kind of thing.
And what about celebrities? I saw a question earlier on saying a celebrity that's connected with a charity, for example. How about that?
I mean, that's usually a slam dunk, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I think immediately of Barbara Windsor, who did an awful lot of work with a lot of charities, and every time her agent said, look, she'd like to come on and talk about whatever it was, because of her celebrity, she would walk through the door and be, you know, treated royally and
national treasure.
National treasure,
absolutely.
Exactly. So yes.
Also, she was great on TV.
Yeah, I mean, celebrity is definitely one of those keys to unlocking our attention.
So we had a question earlier on. I think it's the other one. That's the one I'm looking for. So when I call a journalist, what is a template conversation? Should I go straight in with my pitch and tell them the whole story, or hello, how are you? I'm calling from XYZ and I have a story about something that I think you might be interested in. I mean, is there a template as such, or is there the best approach? What kind of approach would you most welcome?
I think formal but friendly usually works. Not, as I said earlier, not gangbusters pushy. That's a real turn off. But I've got a story which I think would work really well for you guys, and then straight into it's a London story, and it's got. I'll keep banging on about this, but it's got great picture and a great human interest story. Would you be just interested in me telling you some more about it?
Yeah.
The answer to that will be yes. Okay, here's the story in a paragraph. Can I send you an email? Yeah. I mean, that's unlocked that conversation quite easily, I think.
Yeah, and that would be the same for radio or print, social media, because these stories are stories.
A story's a story, and
appeal.
As I said, we need stories.
Yeah.
We need the right stories.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And we would encourage people from the comms world to be proactive and to get in touch with us.
Yeah, I think it
need to hear from them.
What's sometimes frustrating is when you get emails for something that happened 3 days ago.
Yes.
That's just silly, isn't it? That's wasting everyone's time. We don't do that.
No.
We look forward.
It's got to be topical.
It's got to be topical. It's got to be something that's happening in the future that we can arrange, or at least start thinking about how we'll film it and what other elements we'll need to add to it.
Equally, if somebody rang you in the morning with the story happening on the day, it would be too late, perhaps.
Well, yes, unless it was so appealing that you, a quiet news day, for example, and it's so appealing that you thought, I've got to get down to this. I can't off the top of my head think what that would be, but it would have to be pretty damn spectacular.
Yeah. Something that when I worked at ITV London that happened from time to time was that on a busy news day, sometimes stories that you think you're going to use get dropped. And we don't always have time perhaps to get back and personally apologise. Yeah. And I think that perhaps it would be worth telling our audience today not to take that personally. It's simply a matter of news priority on the day, and to keep trying, to come back and try again. Just because something's been dropped doesn't mean that that's it forever.
Yeah, I think that's a point worth making. It is disappointing when that happens. It doesn't happen deliberately. We don't go to the trouble of filming something and drop it because we just are mean, and we're being mean to you. It's because something else has come along and we have an obligation to cover breaking news, of course. Something might have happened on that particular day. But furthermore, I think how you deal with something like that I understand, no hard feelings, of course, that is a sort of relationship builder in itself.
It is.
Because that means that the next time, you know, you're in conversation with us, or you're contacting us, it's like, shame about that last thing, and we're like, oh well, thank you for being so good about it. You're obviously somebody who was, you know, I don't know, is someone we can do business with, if you like.
Yeah. And there are times perhaps when a story is dropped without explanation, without apology, because we're busy people in a shrinking media landscape, and I think that people should realise that, you know, keep coming back.
Yeah,
and
I think there's absolutely no problem with in that case saying, you know, could you give me an explanation why that was dropped? Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair enough. If you've gone out of your way, you should be given the courtesy of at least finding out why.
That's interesting to know. Yeah. Great. I wanted to talk a little bit about newsjacking. This is something that we've covered in recent webinars, and this is, of course, just to remind people, is when there's an ongoing story, a topical story, and you feel that your organisation or your spokesperson has something to add, perhaps an opinion, perhaps an extra element to contribute to the conversation about what's going on, for example, about climate change or the cost of living. Newsjacking could be quite an opportunity, couldn't it, for comms professionals to get in touch with organisations like yours to say, we've got something to say to add to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I would just add at this point is when doing that, bear in mind things like diversity.
Yes.
I just wanted to bring that one into the conversation, because we have ITV has a commitment to diversity. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it is true. And we are often offered spokespeople or experts, male. It might be just because that story is dominated by male voices. For example, I know that initially the conversations about what was going on in Gaza were very male focused, but in general terms, we welcome opportunities to feature women in particular. We want to get that gender balance right, and also from ethnic minorities as well. We want those involved in the conversations. We want our programmes to look like the people who are watching our programmes. So yes, newsjacking is an opportunity. I think everybody follows the news, and if you can anticipate, for example, that the upcoming budget, which all media will cover, we will be looking for case studies. I'm sorry to bang on about case studies, but we will be wanting to say, hey, let's sit down with your business and watch, or you, and let's watch the budget. How has what he said about VAT or business rates, or has that made a difference? Is that what you're looking for? I can also see, based on previous experience, as we get close to a general election, there's a general sort of drift towards how you tell this story over the 12 weeks or whatever it is of campaigning. It's likely that individual newsrooms will want to form little business clubs who they return to again and again. If you're aware and start thinking in those terms and following the news agenda, I think you can anticipate and say, hey, we're a button factory in Catford. You know, we employ 20 people, which is what we're hoping from the March budget or the general election. We'd be delighted if you could come down. We've got some great characters, That's the kind of,
interesting. So newsjacking is an opportunity, and diversity is an opportunity. If you've got spokespeople who are women or from an ethnic background, then we want to hear from these people.
Yes.
So great opportunities there. Lovely. Thanks for that, Brendan. Let's talk about some things that go wrong, because I know that some pitches don't work. I think a lot of us have experienced that. So let's talk about, I know that you had an anecdote to do with Judi Dench.
Yes.
Tell us about what went wrong there.
Well, I think as I touched on earlier, it was about, it really goes back to that, the importance of being accurate when you send in your comms, and that was such a missed opportunity. It's so frustrating. It must have been so frustrating. You've signed up one of the great actresses of our age. She's probably been paid, so you've given her some money to promote something that she probably feels quite passionate about, and because you've completely misspelt Judi Dench's name is Judo Bench. I mean, I know out there, you might be thinking, well, surely you could have put that together, but we were, as I say, we're skimming, and there's a complicated name of a photographer, not complicated, but you know, I think it was an African or a I can't remember exactly what the details were, Indian perhaps, but we weren't that interested in this photography, but we would have absolutely been delighted to go down there had whoever had written that, not only in the headline, but in the body of the copy, not spell checked it, or at least sense checked it. Yeah. And that, I'm afraid, was a great shame for them and a lost opportunity for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get in this question from Alex. Alex asks, how can you break into the news cycle when your own agenda perhaps doesn't correlate? I think what Alex means is when the current news cycle or your news programme is dominated by perhaps internal or international or London events and affairs, which take up a lot of the programme or a lot of column space or a lot of radio time. How do you get your story, leave it into that?
I think... Is it Alex?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Alex, you've got to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. Really, if our attention is over here, and you've got something which is not what we're looking at, you've got to make us sort of take our eye off that ball and look over there to a degree, and we go back to truth. Really,
yeah.
You know, it's got to have those elements that were part of that acronym, at least some of them. If you get that right, you've got a chance of getting our attention.
Oh, look, truth.
There we go.
Just to remind us of all those elements of being topical, relevant, unusual, little bit of tension. Trouble works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, absolutely key, that human interest.
I mean, even if you've got 3 of those, I think you've got a fighting chance of somebody picking up your email and maybe picking up the phone when you call. Yeah.
Which 3?
I mean, I would say unusual, human interest, and relevant or topical.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely, great stuff. Do journalists still like in-person coffees? Asked Lisa, or is it all on Zoom and Teams now?
Sorry, I'm just looking for the. Do just like in-person
coffees?
Oh. In-person coffees? No, we don't have time.
We don't have time, do we?
I'm sorry,
no,
Lisa. Yeah, unless you've got a great coffee. I don't know. You might.
Excellent. Are you more likely, says John, to pitch successfully by going to the planning desk rather than approaching a journalist? So perhaps approaching a reporter? It's interesting, isn't it?
It's a really good, I think that's a really good one. I know that sometimes if you've got a relationship with the journalist, then do that. That is good, because that journalist will then come, has the heft to, if they believe in the story, to get that through the process. Even better, the people with the real power, I shouldn't be saying this, but are the presenters, as you know. And if a presenter says, I think this is a story worth doing, or this is a story worth telling, because they've been approached, then that's quite difficult to bounce back.
Interesting,
yes.
Interesting, very interesting. There's a really good question from Charlie I wanted to put to you. Is the mental health impact, it's a question that came in before, Brendan, is the mental health impact of the cost of living still newsworthy?
Yes, that's a story that's going to run all year, certainly beyond the election, I think. It's proved already to have the kind of elements that I think we're looking for, that people want to hear about. People want to see their lives reflected back at them. People are living through that. Yeah. And it's not just telling stories of misery. It's kind of highlighting, in some cases, injustices and unfairness. And the mental health impact of that is part of that narrative. And it's something, I think, if you look at ITV London, certainly in the last 6 months or so, you'll have seen a lot of stories about poor housing, people living in terrible circumstances, the toll that's taking on their health and their mental health and those of their family. That is something that I think is it has relevance and topicality. So yes.
Let's, in the last few minutes we've got left, let's take a very quick look at what's on your agenda.
Oh yeah.
And perhaps some of the events that are coming up that people could take advantage of when it comes to pitching opportunities.
Yes, I think certainly the first big story that's coming our way at London is the mayoral election on, I think, May the 2nd. So the subjects around that are pretty well rehearsed now. Sadiq Khan fighting for a third term, and Susan Hall, the rather so far underwhelming in terms of her media appearance, if anyone saw on LBC this week. So that's a straight fight in a way, although the battle line seems to be drawn around ULEZ, which continues to be a big bone of contention, where we'll be returning to that again and again. That will mean we want to go to car crushing firms who, for picture, will want to talk to people who are in alternative green technologies. We'll be wanting to speak to car users, businesses who might be impacted by it, either positively or negatively. I can see that one going. We've got some big sporting events. They're national and international. We've got the Euros and we've got the Olympics. That always plays really well with us, not least because the summer months are quite difficult to, as you know, we enter the silly season in July onwards, June, July, August, and they provide us with sensational human interest stories, communities who are getting behind their athletes, former athletes who, you know, are backing their local hero, or schools getting behind their sort of England football heroes from Wembley across the country. That always does really, really well.
Yeah, so lots of opportunities for people to get involved and to think about story pitching based on events that are coming up this year. Now, we've had loads of questions come in today and we haven't been able to cover all of them, but we will be putting some together on a blog or possibly a podcast, so we hope to answer more of these questions. Thank you so much for sending them to us, and thanks very much to Brendan for dealing with them so helpfully. And of course, Brendan talking about TV mainly, but a lot of these tips apply across the board to radio and print. So thank you so much for joining us. We do have an upcoming masterclass that I wanted to tell you about. The next one is on Wednesday the 21st of February at 11 o'clock, and this one, it's a big one, how to lead and manage your comms team during a crisis. So we look forward to seeing you all again then. I hope you can join us for that date. It just remains for me to say thank you so much, Brendan, for joining us this morning and for all your invaluable advice, you know, from the heart of the news editor. And thank you so much again to everybody for all your amazing questions and comments. It's been really good fun. Hope to see you again really soon. Bye bye for now.